Sobriety is the best thing that ever happened to me. It changed the direction of my life.
Welcome to Controlled Chaos. I am your host, Shana. And can you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, my name is Austin. I am so happy to be here. First of all, I love the podcast. I love what you're doing on social media. I think that everything you're doing is amazing. So let me start with that. I got sober in 2015, which feels like simultaneously yesterday and a million years ago. And I don't know why that is, but I think that's the way time works now in the post-COVID world that we're in. But yeah, so I have like the kind of, I'll just tell you a little bit about how I ended up where I ended up sober and then what I've done since then. But because I think that's what you asked me, right? Now I've forgotten what your question was.
I just said, tell me a little bit about yourself. So yeah, whatever that
do
means,
that. Let me start with who I am now, and then we can talk about other things later. How's that sound? So, like I said, my name is Austin, and I am really fortunate that I get to share my story of sobriety every single day with people all over the place. I started sharing really widely on social media in June of last year. I host every weekday live on TikTok where people come in. We have anywhere between 50 and 100 people every single day on that app, sharing their sobriety journey, answering questions about people who are sober. I am a transformation coach as well. I help people not only in sobriety, but understand how to transform their lives in sobriety. So after they've kind of overcome that hurdle of sobriety, the first few weeks or months, and as we start to build that new life in sobriety, that's really what I'm focused on. A lot of my energy goes to helping people understand that we can find happiness in the day that we have instead of looking either to the past or the future for that happiness, and that really everything that we need is right here in today.
I love that. So that is actually one of my favorite things and the thing that I focus on most, because when I first tried to get sober, and I tried for about 2 decades without a whole lot of success, the reason I kept relapsing, I feel, was because I never felt happy, or like I felt bad sober and I felt bad when I was drinking, right? And it was like, so I'm going to quit drinking just to feel like shit. Why? And I never really understood that there's this like time, right? Like even like almost 6 months to a year, right? I don't want to like put people off who are newly getting sober, but where you start to feel like the best is like 6 months to a year, right? Like 3 months, you're going to feel a lot better, right? But I just kept going to that like 30-day period and then being like, I really hate it here and I'm going to go back. So like, I love that you kind of like find the joy, because first of all, you have to do things that you love. You have to find new hobbies. And second of all, how you feel when you're newly sober is not how you're going to feel 6 months in, a year in, definitely not 3 or 4 years in. So can you tell us like a little bit about finding happiness in sobriety? What does that look like for you or for your client?
Yeah, I think happiness is a choice. I mean, I think that there are external things that we have going on in our lives that are impacting us. But I do think even when my life is challenging or hard, I can find happiness in the day that I have. A big chunk of that for me is being present where I am. Because honestly, the closer I am to the minute that I'm in, the easier it is to be happy. The further that I get away from this minute in my thinking, the easier it is to find problems, find stressors, beat myself up about the things that I did in the past, right? But in this moment that I'm in right now, I can find a lot of happiness. Part of the way that I do that, and what I teach my clients as well, we start with values in our lives, and that's the building block of what we're going to start with. And after we start to build our values, we start to work on intention. So what direction do we want to go based on those values? And then from there, we use actions to put those things into practice. And when we do that, when we start with our values and then extend it into intention, and then intention drives action, it doesn't matter if we're achieving our goals or not achieving them, or if we start in a different direction and maybe abandon that thing that we were working on. We can find this happiness here because I'm enjoying the process. I'm enjoying my life. I'm finding joy here because it's in alignment with who I am and who I want to be.
So what are some good ways to like, because it's easy to say, right? It's easy to say like, just think about the now or stay in the now and don't worry about tomorrow. What are some, because you talked about right? What are some actionable ways to like for people to actually stay in the now and not stress about tomorrow?
This is the lifelong practice, I think, is figuring out how to stay in the now.
Mm-hmm.
pouring all of, I use this example of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for my daughter the other day. This is an example I use a lot, actually, because it's concrete, which I need in my life, concrete examples. So I have a value in my life is to be a better father, be a better husband. Those are important values to me, to build a strong family. And so in my intentions, then it's about setting action to do those things. So making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for my daughter the other day for her lunch that she's going to have at school. And I focus all of my intention on that sandwich. I am not focused on, oh, is she going to have a good day? Did she have an okay day yesterday? All I'm doing, all my energy is going to that one sandwich. I am hyper focused on that. The great thing about that is it also fits with my values and the intentionality that I have in my life. And so when I got done making that sandwich, one of the things that I focus on is kind of reflecting on that moment. And is that making me who I want to be? Or is it somehow detracting from my intention or my value? And then I can better understand that. So that's kind of turning that mindfulness into action. So it's not just like thinking about the sandwich, but then I'm using that to drive me forward a little bit as well. So, the idea that we're going to just focus all of our energy on the thing that's right in front of us, which in practice is incredibly hard.
Yes. So I think that's actually really good because a lot of times it's hard to see like, how do we stay in this one moment and not get like onto the next thing right away? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I find myself driving in the car with my daughter and listening to her tell me about her day, and I'm both there and somewhere else at the same time. And I'm actually not either place fully. And I have to take that moment to say, which place do I want to be? Do I want to be in the future that I'm thinking about or the stress that I'm worrying about? Or do I want to be here? And which one of those things aligns better with who I want to inevitably be?
I love that. That's really good. So you talked a little bit about TikTok and kind of what you do there. And I love that. I love just the live environment on TikTok and being able to get on there and just speak to people and be able to like touch people who maybe didn't even know they needed you, right? But they stop and they see something and they're like, oh, like I align with that and I really want to listen and, ask questions and get to know things. So how has your experience been on, getting to know people on TikTok and talking to people and that type of thing?
It has been amazing to me. I actually just before we got on here today, I was on my live. I do it at noon Mountain Time every single weekday. And today we totaled up the amount of sobriety that was in our group that day. And it was more than 200 years of sobriety in the group. And I have the same people that come to this every day. I've been doing the same live every weekday for about 6 months. And we have the same people that come every single day, super supportive. And exactly what you're talking about. The amazing thing to me is we have people that come in that are on day 0 who are like, I really want to get there, but I can't. Or having that chronic relapse where I get to day 3 or I get to day 10, I can't get over that hurdle. And then we have people that are 35 years of sobriety, 40 years of sobriety in that group. They're like, let me tell you about how amazing life gets when you get over that 1-year hump or that 2-year hump or that slump in the 3rd year or whatever it is. And they're sharing this amazing hope for the future. So I'm amazed at the people who are well into their sobriety that come every single day and are super supportive. And I'm amazed at the people who come in that are like, I've been thinking about getting sober, and here you guys are talking about sobriety today. And we've had people, now that we've been doing it for 6 months, we have people coming back. They're like, I was here on day 0 and now I'm on day 100. And so we have these 6 stories that are happening. And it's really spawned an entire community of people that are connecting on the platform, but also off the platform, that have made friendships and are now continuing those conversations other places as well, which is really amazing.
I love that. So let's tell them, what is your TikTok name?
So it's all my social media is the same. It's Austin J. Karr, and it's Karr. So
yay! Yeah. So then, if they want to check out your TikTok, check out your Instagram. My favorite thing and how I think that I came across your account was you do a lot of. So you don't do as much of the normal what you see people on Instagram doing reels. You do a lot of just talking to the camera. And I love that because I just somehow seen it one day and it was like conversational pieces of like, hey, this is where I'm at in my sobriety, or this is what I'm feeling. And like, what do you think about this? And kind of getting everybody's opinion. And that also, is good for the newer people in sobriety because it's like, oh, well, do I want to try this NA beer or do I not? Do I want to do this? It gives people the choices. And that's something that I don't know about you, but I didn't have in my early sobriety was like this cool community that I could like reach out and touch. Like I kind of, even though I worked in treatment for many years and I kept relapsing, I kind of always felt alone. And somehow the internet has made it so it's very like real and accessible.
It's such an interesting place to be in sobriety in social media. Because when I got sober, there was no, I mean, there was a few creators, and I know that you've had some of them on that started TikTok or Instagram accounts really early in their sobriety, and it's been a decade or more. And so those accounts were there, but they were very few and far between. But I love this idea that we can have a broader conversation about sobriety, that it isn't a prescription, that it is really an invitation to do sobriety in the way that works for you. And the important part of that is the way it works for you. If it's not working for you, if you're doing this thing and it's not working, don't abandon sobriety, abandon that thing that's not working and try something new, fit a new piece into the puzzle. And that's what I want people to do, is be really curious in their sobriety. I always say that I want people to be curious about sobriety in the same way I was curious about my addiction. I gave my addiction so many choices, so many chances. Like every day I was like, well, this is torture, but maybe not tomorrow. And I gave it every opportunity to show me that it was terrible. And I kept going back to it. And sometimes in sobriety, I think we don't give it as many chances as we should. And I think the social media aspect gives us a chance to find people that speak to us, that share our story. We find those commonalities. We click with people, right? I have people that I follow whose story is not my story, but is like, I get something from their story and it builds my sobriety, makes me a better person. And I think that that is really, truly amazing that we can do that.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that you bring up people who are at different places or may have, their alcoholism or addiction may look different than yours, because I really learned or grew up around mostly AA people, and I still love AA, and it's a part of me, but that was all I ever seen. And it was a lot of times like, this is how you get sober. This is it. This is what you do. And I wasn't able to get sober with just AA. I tell everybody my toolbox is a mix of everything, like meditation. There's a little God in there. There's a little AA. There's some meetings. There's like a little bit of everything. I had to use medication in the beginning. I used the Vivitrol shots. So I tell people like, you really can use some of everything, right? Like you can take what works from you from everybody, instead of sometimes we look at people and we're like, well, I don't like that they're doing that, so I'm not gonna, or that doesn't, no, I don't like that. And it's like, why don't you take what you can use from that person and move on to the next and take what you can use? And that's what I've tried to do. And that's why I love social media. And at first I was like, I would look at people who maybe just quit drinking, but didn't necessarily, claim that they're alcoholics, and be like, well, you can't do that. And I'm like, no, because that's exactly what some people in AA did to me, wanted to put me in a box. And you can't do that. There is no one size fits all for anything in life, really.
No, and I mean, if I think AA is amazing, there's a reason that it's been around for nearly 100 years. Let's just like, it works for some people. But if it worked for everyone, there wouldn't be a need for anything else. But the fact that there are other things means that it doesn't work for everyone. I think that what Bill and Bob stumbled upon and worked really hard at was pretty amazing for the time that they were in. And I think now we have Smart Recovery and Celebrate Recovery and Dharma Recovery and all these options. It's great. And people finding sobriety through TikTok and Instagram and getting sober and staying sober. And how amazing is that? I think one of the other things we're seeing that I am super excited about are the people who are getting sober so much sooner than I did and other people did, where they're like, I can't even see bottom yet, but I know this isn't the life that I want to live. And other people have showed me that it's okay. And I can build a community on social media, and it's okay for me to put down the wine and live a different life. And I love that because that's what I want for people. I want them to be able to leave behind this life that wasn't what they wanted and live something different.
Me too. I love that it's getting almost cool. I won't even say almost. It's getting cool to be sober. Like it used to be kind of like, I don't want to say a tramp stamp, but a tramp stamp, right? It was like the stamp or something on you, like something's wrong with you. And truthfully, I think there's, something wrong with alcohol, just like there's something wrong with cigarettes. And like people can choose to do that. And some people can choose to do it and have fun and just do it sometimes. But not everybody can, right? Like it's getting cool to be sober. And I love that about social media.
Yeah, I think it's opened up the conversation so much because it isn't just in dark church basements anymore, right? It is out and open in the light. And I think that, social media is helping that. I think the NA options are shifting the conversation a little bit. I think there's a lot of things happening at this point in history where people are exploring whether or not they want a sober life or some version of sobriety, depending on where they're at. And I think that's what we want. And, I think that the idea that you have to drink is becoming less of a cultural norm. I think we're still working on it, but the idea that you don't have to drink anymore is pretty amazing.
I love that. So I'm going to ask you the question that everyone always asks me as a sobriety and recovery coach. And so I'm not good at being like super proper, but you're so smart and good at speaking. So I'm going to ask you and see what your answer is. I'm the one who's just going to like fly off my tongue and say something crazy. That's who I am. So my question is, what is, when there's sponsors out there, say, or there's rehab out there, what is the point of a sobriety coach? Why would you hire a sobriety coach instead of just getting a sponsor who's free or going to rehab where they have, doctors or nurses? What is the value in a sobriety coach from your point of view?
I think accountability is a big piece of that puzzle. Having somebody in your corner that is rooting for you to succeed and is there to provide you with some tools and insight, I think is really, really important. I do think, though, that a sponsor in AA, a peer support person in smart recovery, inpatient rehab, outpatient IOPs, counselors, therapists are all important tools. And I don't think that you should look at any of those and say any one of those is more important than the other. I think that you should look at all those options and explore them and figure out what works for you. Like you said just a minute ago, take what you can use and leave the rest. Find what works. I think often a coach, whether it's a life coach, a transformation coach, a transition coach, whatever person you're looking for, they have some knowledge about what you want to try and accomplish. And they're there to hold your hand. But oftentimes my job is to listen to the client to understand where they're at. And I find so many times my clients will talk themselves into the answer. Like I'm not there to give them the answer. They find the answer on their own. I'm sometimes there just to be on the other end of the phone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I definitely agree. And I think my thought on it is kind of the same as it is on, AA or smart recovery or that type of thing, is just like, what works the best for you? Because for me, I went to rehab numerous times and it didn't work for me. I had a sponsor numerous times. It didn't work for me. Working one-on-one with a sobriety coach was like somebody, I'm investing in myself, first of all. And then somebody was there who has knowledge, who's like actually done the studying, done the work around it, right? And then also has the experience. So that peer side of it, like a sponsor, right? But also that educated side, like you get with like your RAs in treatment. And I worked in treatment for a long time. And, the recovery advocates in treatment remind me a lot of actually what a sober coach does. So I think it's kind of just, for me, it's like, what works for you and what are you looking for? So I think I agree with you there. And I love that.
Yeah. I think there are coaches that focus really heavily on the neuroscience, and that for some people that really speaks to them. And that's part of how they get sober. For other people, it is that spiritual journey. And that's a big part of how they get sober. And so even within the coaching sphere, you've got people like right? My program is really focused on embracing the day that you have, living in today, aligning your intentions and values. That's what I teach my clients. We talk about the neuroscience, but we don't spend a lot of time on it. Whereas other coaches will spend a lot of time there. And so I think it's finding, even within the coaching world, like which coach works for you the best.
Right. And I agree. Like I just kind of said, I'm more like, I'm your ADD girl all over the place, like doing a little bit of everything, meditation, all of that stuff. And like certain people are attracted to me and the way I coach for that reason, right? They like can't do boring or they can't do. And, some people are looking for like, okay, what do I do next? If you're looking for like, a step-by-step plan, you're not going to do well with me. I mean, there's a little bit of a plan, right? But still, I'm just very spontaneous and different. And I would definitely think you're a little more planned out, right? So I kind of, if there is such a difference, right?
It is amazing. And you've probably done the same thing. I have people that reach out to me and are like, hey, I'm talking to 2 or 3 coaches. And I'm like, that's perfect. That's what you should do, because they've watched my TikToks or my Instagram. They know who I am a little bit, but they don't know my program specifically. And mine's like, I start with a fairly regimented program, but then the client leads from there. So we do good foundational work, and then it's really up to them to guide the rest of our conversation. But I think that finding that right person for you, the person who gives you the right things in your toolbox, and then also understand that the goal of that is for those people, is for all of our clients to get to the point where they're like, I'm good. I'm going to, right? We're done. Yeah. So I think it's great. I love the sobriety coaching space. I think it's really great for a lot of people. It does give you that accountability. You also, like you said, have to invest, which helps a lot of people to like, I'm going to do this because I'm financially investing and I'm investing my time as well. And I think those things are really important, but that's not what keeps you sober. What keeps you sober is the work you do.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think there is something to being ready, right? What do you feel like? How do you feel that when you're ready? Like if somebody comes to you and says, I think that I might want to quit drinking, what's your response?
This is such an interesting question, because my experience is so much different than so many other people's in a lot of ways. I think that once you get to the point, I think it really comes down to this question that people have in their minds of, is there something else? Right? When you get to that point where you think, is the way I'm living the only thing that I can do? Is this it? Is this chaos and this confusion and this unknown and feeling uncomfortable all the time and seeming that other people have their lives together and I don't, and I can't get it together? Like, it's just this looming question. Can I do something different? I think an early, like if you think about alcohol use disorder spectrum, right? Earlier in that spectrum, that's where people get to. I was at I don't want to quit drinking, and I just quit drinking out of spite. Like I just wanted to prove to people that I could quit drinking, and then I was going to go back to drinking. But I ended up staying sober because life got so much better. But I do think there's this like uneasy feeling that people have of like, is this it? Is this what my life is going to be? And
yeah.
Is there more? And I think that that's where a lot of people get to.
I agree. And I think that actually brings up a really good point that like a lot of our focus is on like the alcohol. And I've been addicted to numerous things, but I focus on alcohol because alcohol was what really brought me to my knees and what was the hardest to stop. And it's also what I like to work with people on the most, but I think you can substitute that with any drug, right? I think that you hear all the time that it's like a symptom, right? It's not the actual problem. And I think that you kind of touched on that is like, it's more than the using, like it's our actual life. Like we focus on alcohol a lot, right? But it's like my life. Like I just did not like my life. I did not like who I was. I looked around and was like, why does she have this? Or why does he have that? Or why don't I have that? And it's like, because you're not doing what she's doing. Like if you can be, and I did have a little jealous streak. I definitely did. I still do. I have to nip that a lot, but you really have to, when you look at people and you want what they have, like, are you willing to do what they're doing?
Yeah, completely. I want to go back to something you talked about earlier, the symptom of the problem, right? Because I think that alcohol or addiction in general, I'll talk about specifically about alcohol, but it is sometimes covering up these problems we have. Like I was insecure with myself. And so alcohol made me less insecure or seemingly less insecure, right? But then eventually alcohol started causing its own problems. And my
Mhm.
problems stemmed from alcohol. So it's both a symptom and a problem at the same time because it just starts to create these really unique problems that only alcohol causes or
Yeah.
only your drug of choice will cause, right? Health problems, mental problems. I mean, all kinds of things. But interestingly enough, it's funny because when I talk to people about comparison, and I was thinking about this when you were talking, I try like comparison is the thief of joy, right? Like that's what we,
So
but
bad.
it can at the beginning start to help us a little bit, and because it is easy to look around and go, why does their life just seem easier than mine? My life seems hard, and that's where I got my life just was so hard, and other people's lives seemed easy. Now, whether or not that's true is really beside the point. But I looked at other people and thought, I do want what they have. And then in early sobriety, finding that hope in other people that were sober, and I could look at them and I go, that's the life I want to live. And what are they doing to do that? They're continuing their sobriety. And so if I want that, if I want the ease that they talk about, I just have to get through some of this garbage in the
Yeah.
beginning.
And you're right. I think comparison does kind of light that fire under you, right? Like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. I want what this person has, or not even necessarily what they have, right? But like maybe you're striving for something that you see in them, like happiness or like family. Like I would look at people who were good mothers a lot. I was a mom since I was 16 years old, right? So like I was a baby when I had my first daughter, and I also started my, using right around that time. So it's like I would always look at people and be like, how do they do, how are they at baseball games for 8 hours a day or for 8 hours in the weekend? Like I can't even get out of bed half the time. Like I can't make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for my kid in the morning for school. And these people are out here at like hockey games for days and stuff. Like what that would like, entice me to like, how do I do that? Because I wanted to be a good mom, right? But that's not something that you're just like born with, right? It's like, how do I get to do that? So was there things that you looked at in other people and you were like, that's what I want?
Yes, I wanted to be a dad that was there for their kids all the time. That was a
Yeah.
big one. I wanted to be a good husband. I wanted to be a good employee. I wanted to be a good friend. And I know that that's what I wanted even in my addiction because that is how I projected myself to the world. I pretended to be all of those things. I pretended to be a good dad, a good husband, a good friend, but none of it was true. It was just all a projection. And then eventually the projection fell apart because you can't maintain addiction in the way that I was and think that things are going to be fine on the outside. It just falls apart. So yeah, I knew that those are the things that I wanted in my life because it's what I wanted people to believe about me. And that I don't know that I actually knew that like logically,
Right.
know that that's what I was projecting out to people.
Right. So looking back on, your days in your alcoholism, when we talk about like what kind of a father you were, do you feel like you were a good father, or do you feel like there was just things missing? Or how do you, because I talk to people a lot about like shame and regret, and I always don't know sometimes where to put that, right? Because I really was a parent ever since I was young, and I really did try my hardest, besides being an alcoholic, which was not great. And they definitely went through things. But when they say you give all you have, that's all I had at the time. So when I look back, I do this balancing act, right? With like, I don't want to be in a shame place, right? I do want to say, Shana, you did the best that you could, but I also, you have to take responsibility for not doing the things that you should have done. So what do you tell people when they come to you, or how do you feel about your own parenting?
I was a terrible parent, but I was a terrible everything. Like I was a good drinker. And that was all that I was, especially toward the end. So my daughter was about 2.5 when I quit drinking. My second daughter has never seen me drink. And so it's a very different experience for her. I was so self-centered. Everything was about me. And everything was really about maintaining my addiction. Like, it is impossible to be as far into addiction as I was and not have your entire life centered around that. You have to lie. You have to hide. You have to, all of these things that are necessary to maintain an addiction like that, because it, all the energy goes to that. And so I was a terrible husband. I was a terrible father. I was a terrible friend. I was a terrible employee. Like, I couldn't, those things aren't possible to maintain addiction in the way that I was maintaining it. And I'm with you. The shame thing is really hard. I struggle with shame still. It's something that I still really work on. It does sometimes kind of rise out of nowhere when you have one of those memories and you're like, I haven't thought about that for a while, and now I need to work through it. The biggest thing for me is to realize that I was that person. The person in addiction was me. I was not a different person. And I can go back to being that person if I start on a different path in my life, if I choose to make different choices. So it's not that that was a different person and I'm a different person now. We're the same. We made different choices. We were at different points. So part of when that shame rises up, I have to realize, like, that is not who I am now. Those aren't the decisions that I would make now. And I think it's really important to, in some ways, separate those two people, but also realize that they're very definitely the same person. I talk about shame as I talk about this all the time. It's one of my favorite topics, as these little boxes that sit on a shelf. They sit over here to my right. And each experience is a little ball of shame inside this box. And I take it down and I open it up and I have to kind of handle it. And when one of those pieces of new shame rises up, or something that I'm recalling, it's really painful and it's sharp and it hurts to hold. But the more I look at it and the more I understand it and the more I explore who I am now versus then, am I the same person? Would I make those choices now? It smooths out and it becomes easier to handle. And eventually I might wear it down to nothing, but some of those things are still up there on the shelf. They're just easier to handle now, and some of them are gone. And occasionally there's a new thing on the shelf that I got to deal with. And even in sobriety, there's things that I've done that I'm like, that's not the way I want to handle that. And I handle it. I'm ashamed of it, or I carry shame or guilt or whatever. So that's the way I think about it. I have to keep handling it. I have to keep working it. And then eventually it either disappears or I become okay with it sitting there and I accept that it's there.
I really like that. So what that actually made me think of is, a lot of times when we talk about relapse, right? We talk about, some people say it's just like part of recovery, right? And other people are like, no, it's not a part of recovery, right? So my thought on it is that it doesn't have to be a part of recovery, but it does happen to some people, right? And you need to be careful of it. You need to keep working your program, or whatever your program is, right? But it made me think of the fact that we talk about a lot of times that when you're in recovery, you're so many steps away from drinking or using, right? And there's so many, it would take me so many steps right now, like something horrible, God forbid, could happen to me right now. And it would take a lot of steps on my part for me to pick up and use, right? It would take me being super upset, not dealing with that, not talking to anyone, maybe just, lying or going to the store, doing different things, right? Before an actual relapse, right? So what are the things that you see that happen to people before a relapse? What have you seen that's really okay, I feel like something's going to happen? What are warning signs for people? Because I feel like as alcoholics and addicts, sometimes we're like, we don't know what happened. All of a sudden I was just drunk. But that's not really how it goes, right? There's so many steps before then.
Absolutely. I think one of the things you said there is really important, that idea of working a program. I think oftentimes we think work a program and we think Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's a part of the terminology of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm working a program. I work a program outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. My life is a program of work. I have daily things that I do in order to maintain the life that I want, not to maintain my sobriety, but to maintain the life that I want. And I think what happens to a lot of people before they even start on the road of return to use is they start to diverge from that path of the life that I want. So for me, a really early indication is lying. And it starts with lying to myself. That's the first place it starts. And if I start lying to myself, I know that I've taken this ever so slight detour, a half a step, in the wrong direction. And if I don't work to correct those things really quickly, that's how that path starts to diverge. That's how we start working on a relapse. We often hear that term when people are talking about, their return to use. Oh, I started working on a relapse. And so it is that like small steps. So things like letting stress get the best of you and wanting to escape, right? I can get really stressed and then I'm like, oh, I just need to check out for a while. Ooh, that's a bad place for me to be because I know how I can check out. So I might start with TV. Oh, I'm just going to take the night off and relax a little bit. But then I notice, oh, I'm a little bit of a shame spiral because I didn't get the things that I wanted done. Or I started lying to my spouse. Maybe I just a little white lie, or a client, or, I was really busy, but I don't want to tell them the truth about why I was busy. There's all these little tiny things that I know are in my program of work that I do daily. And if I stop doing those things, it doesn't mean that I'm going to drink tomorrow. It means that I am diverging from the life that I want. And then
yes. So that's exactly okay. We're now besties. I can't even. I tell everybody all the time in my addiction, before my addiction, for some reason, I think my drug was always lying. Like I would lie about the most stupid things. And you're right. A lot of it was like, I don't want this person to be upset with me. So I'm just going to tell like this little white lie, down to like, I'm going to tell the most obnoxious thing that even I know that I'm not going to remember tomorrow because first of all, I'm too drunk to remember. Second of all, there are way too many details in this. So I love to hear somebody else just kind of call out their little character quirks or whatever, because I think a lot of times we don't admit out loud like what our actual maybe like downfalls or whatever are. And that was a huge thing for me. Like I have these sets of values, right? And when I was using, I would like stomp all over them. And in my sobriety, I wrote them down and I make sure that I align with those all the time. And do I get off track? Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. But like I go back and try to correct it, or I'm like, okay, next time you probably shouldn't do that. Do I ever not lie anymore? I wish that I could say no, but I really try my hardest, even when it's stupid. I'll come back and be like, okay, that was a lie. Like, I don't know why I did that, but it has been a thing for me. And it's something that I worked really hard in my sobriety to get away from. So I think you're right in saying that you start to get away from like your core values or the things that matter to you. And you're like kind of just slipping a little bit backwards, right?
Yeah, and then when we do that, I think you're totally right. I lied about everything, by the way. I also thought that everyone lied. Like, I lied about everything. I don't know why.
One time
I will tell you just a really quick
bar in Marquette, Michigan. I'm like, why did I do that? There was like this rumor that he was coming here because his daughter was going to like check out the college here. And I really told her I was drinking or whatever. But the next day I was like, why did you say that? Like she lives in this town. I've never even talked to her about it, but I'm like, what did you do? Like, what was the point of that? You know what I mean? Like, in what way did that even help me? Or did it have anything to do with the conversation? Like, just for no reason. Like, right. There's no God-given reason.
I think that's the amazing thing about lying is like, I to this day would not be able to tell you why I lie about things. I often find myself, if I have a temptation to tell a lie, it isn't like, sometimes I won't, like, even if I end up telling the lie, I think about why I did. I really think about like, why did I need to shade the truth or, because there's always an underlying reason. I'm embarrassed. I'm worried about something. Like there's always, so even if I don't correct the lie, because it was,
why or what happened.
I learned why. I learned a little bit more about myself. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think
I do feel the need. I don't feel the need to lie as much now that I'm in sobriety. It does come up in things where I feel like a people pleasing or whatever. And that's where I have to be like, okay, like you need to be honest, because honestly, there was a long time I worked in treatment, like at a huge treatment center for probably like 10 years or something like that. And I lied about my sobriety, right? I would relapse all the time. And at the end of the day, when I finally left there, because I was like, you have to get sober, right? Like you have to get it together. You like forget the job, right? The job is really cool. It's really fun, but like you have to get sober. And I left there with this like deep, deep feeling with you have been lying to no one but yourself for 10 years. Like your kids know, your family knows. You can't get out of bed 90% of the time. Like everyone knows. And also, like, I spent that whole time having all these friends who were like my best friends, and they didn't know me at all because I couldn't be honest with them. Right. So, really, what it did was, alcoholism isolates you anyways, but I was so isolated that like it was not even explainable with people around me all the time. So like at the end of the day, when you're doing these things, you're really doing them to you. You know what I mean? Because nobody there, I mean, did they care that I was using? Yeah, they wouldn't have loved it, but they could have, fired me and found somebody else that day, right? It wouldn't have really affected them. Who it affected was me because I wasn't being honest and I could have never gotten sober that way.
Yeah, you think about that, like the cycle of escape, lying, use, like it feeds itself and it does just cripple you so completely to the point that let's talk about my addiction was this monster and it occupied every inch of my life. I couldn't escape. It was in my house. It was at my job. It was everywhere I went. And I couldn't imagine how to get away from it. And so I just lied more and used more and then drug around the shame of that and then repeat that cycle every single day because I could not figure out how to not do that until I did.
And there's something in the whole business of alcoholism and addiction that really is like a shame circle, right? Like it's like you feel shameful, so you can't handle that, so you're going to drink or use again, right? And the more you do these things that are out of your character or what you want your character to be, I guess, because technically it is your character at that time, but like what you would want to be, who you want yourself to be, the more you go against that, the more you drink or use because you don't like who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then throw just a highly addictive substance that changes the brain chemistry, and you've got a perfect storm for, shame and brain chemistry and addictive substances, and it is a perfect storm for continued usage.
It is. But I'll also say, I say all the time, I think addicts, alcoholics, we have, we can be like the perfect storm and it can be real horrible, but like we get our shit together. We're really like a force to be reckoned with. Like my husband will tell me like the way that you just like get something when you want it, like it's happening is like on another level. And I'm like, yeah, like that's how I've always been. It just used to be about drinking, right?
Is that the way? Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the way you were before you started? Like when you were young, was that like a vibrant, excited, energetic? Is that the way you were before you started drinking? And I know you started drinking young, but
yes and no. So I can remember from the time I was young, just feeling super different than like other people. And I was very anxious and very like, I think I was having panic attacks when I was like 10, 11 years old. And it was like, I didn't want to eat in front of people. I would like be scared, or if like boys were around, it was over. Like I wasn't talking, like other people would be like kissing in the woods behind the football stadium. And I was like, oh God, like get me away from all of that because I wouldn't even know what to do with myself. Right. So I got put on ADD medication at like 12. And when I got put on that, it really gave me this like boost of like energy and confidence and then, the drinking gave me even more confidence. So I've always been a super hype, bubbly, fun person, but I was always very shy and like scared. So what happened in sobriety was I learned how to be myself and just finally doing it enough. I got over like the anxious feelings and I don't know, like the panic and all of that. And I think just healing a lot of stuff that happened, when I was young. You know, I'm not like an advocate for or against medication, but I think putting like young children on stimulants is like a little iffy. I don't feel good about where it started my life at. And I feel like it really changed the chemistry in my brain and in my life at that time, right? Instead of having to, which it would have been a shit show, right? But instead of having to figure out why I was so anxious or like counseling and therapy and like doing the work maybe then, or maybe when I was like 20, I don't know, and getting over that hump, instead I had this like false adrenaline and false confidence and alcohol and you know, then I got pregnant young, so I moved out of my house and I really was doing what I wanted to do or what I thought was working for me at a super young age, if that makes sense. But yes, always been super bubbly, a little on the crazy side, but I was out of ordinary, shy and anxious as a young kid. And I think that was what really, I thought when I tried Adderall for the first time that like Jesus had came down from heaven and like gave me a solution. I was like, oh goodness, like this is how people feel every day. Like they're like talking and outgoing and hyper and not hyper, but I was just super confident and able to, you know, say anything I wanted, do anything I wanted. I also lost a whole bunch of weight. So it just, I don't know. I could go on about that topic forever too. The medications.
Our stories are so similar. It's almost crazy.
Really?
Got diagnosed with ADD young, super shy, very anxious. Still think of myself on my worst days as a shy little boy sitting out from gym class. Started with Adderall when I was a kid. Kind of a little bit different in that I figured out that like, oh, other people's brains don't feel like it's on fire all the time. Like it was quiet for a hot minute. But then I also realized when I went to college that Adderall does some like can keep me awake. And that was kind of my first, like, I can stay focused and I can kind of tap into that hyper focus and I can stay awake for a really long time and I can do that. So then that like being a shy little boy, then I found alcohol and it was like, oh, these two things working together is the solution to everything. And then just blew it nearly 2 decades of my life.
See, it's so hard to explain to people, but I think you just said it perfectly. Everybody else doesn't feel like there's fire going on in their brain all day. It's so hard to explain to people how Adderall or stimulants in general, I think, will give people like you and I this feeling of calm, but also hyper. Like I was like, oh my, because I'm a low, so I'm fun, energy, all of that stuff. But as far as like energy, I was always a low energy person. Like, you know, people would want to work out or want to go for walks. And I'm like, oh God, like, I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to get out of bed half the time. Like I was very low energy. So, and especially having children young, it was like, oh, well, I can do this and I can pick out every single outfit for the next 7 days and I can put them in a row and I can add, but then it was also calm. It was the first time that all the things going on in my head made sense so that I could like portion them out and do what I was supposed to do. But it also was like a hot mess at the same time once I found alcohol. So yeah, I'm glad to see somebody else that like understands that, because it was like going from being so shy to having that boost at such a young age was like a blessing and a curse, right? Like I felt amazing, but it also spiraled over the next 20 years, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about medication for younger people and stuff. That's why I'm so glad people make their own decisions for their children. And I don't, because I'm like, oh,
right. I don't want to make those decisions for other people. I have no desire to. I think I wish I would have developed some skills. And I think that's exactly what you were talking about. Like when I was younger, I lacked the skills to kind of organize things. And that was attention deficit was a lot of that, but it was just also being young, right? Like you just prefrontal cortex isn't developed yet, but like I need those skills. I've had to develop those skills in my 30s and 40s now, right? Like those organizational skills and routine and the things I need in my, and that's when I talk about like working a program. My life is a program, right? Routine is a good thing for me. Habits are a good thing for me. Living my life in a structured way works for me. And that's something I had to learn after I quit drinking because I didn't have any of the skills to even like get up on a Tuesday. So
yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I do have to say, just for people listening that, and probably for you too, can I ask how old you are?
I'll be 44 this year.
Okay, so that's about right. I'm 38. So just so everybody knows, I know Adderall and ADD medications are like super prevalent now, but like back when I got prescribed and probably when you got prescribed, it was like not a known thing. So like when I got prescribed, my doctor actually told us like, if you don't have ADD, it won't do anything for you. If you do have ADD, it'll work perfectly. And we just went and got the prescription from the doctor or from the pharmacy like it was like ibuprofen. And I carried it around and I took it like I wanted to take it. So like when people are like, well, how did you like abuse it? Or how did your parents? And I'm like, my parents, nothing. It wasn't like a known issue like it is now, right? It wasn't known. I remember I had one of my family members' boyfriends was like, he found out that I took it and he was like bugging me for it. And I gave him like a few. And then he was like trying to like come by my house and like come outside, come. And I was like hiding from him. He was like a grown up, like 20. And I was like literally probably 12. So like I had no idea what I was taking and how it's so different now, right? It's like people want it and they use it for that reason. But at the time, I literally thought like, this is going to help me in school, help me.
Yeah. The amazing thing is it did in certain ways. And then
it did.
Because I'm an addict, I figured out different ways to use it, right? Like it just was like, I learned that I could get certain things. It became a tool. Like alcohol became a tool in my life. I started to use a different substance to fix things about me, and those things caused problems. The interesting thing is I did start to realize when I was in college that I was like, I can't take this anymore. Like I started to realize it was a problem. Now I kept drinking for another, 15 years, but I was like, that Adderall's too much. I can't do that.
I did the same thing, but it was after doing like numerous crazy things, right? Because after a while, what it does to your brain is like, makes you crazy, right? When you're drinking and using a whole bunch of Adderall, not as prescribed, right? Let me just put that out there for people who are using it correctly. That's not what I'm speaking about. But when you're using it for other purposes, it takes over and you start to act like way out of character. I went from being shy to like, say something to me. Like, say something to me. But like, I think that was definitely what started my issues with addiction and alcoholism. And I don't know, you can't go back and say, would that have happened without it? But it definitely was the start for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. You can go back and look and be like, okay, I had these things happen and that could have led to this. And like you said, I don't know, but I do know that like I can find addiction in all kinds of things. And so, yeah. So it's like, was it that, or is that the way I'm wired? Is that the way my brain works? I don't know. But I do think that one of the things I think is really important, and this is the conversation we're having, but when you use medication as prescribed, it can be so helpful. And when you use it in a way that's harmful, it's going to be harmful. And so I think that, when we talk about medically assisted treatment or, medicine for different neurological issues, like these are important, useful tools if you use them correctly, and they can be detrimental to your life if you choose to use them incorrectly.
Yeah. And I definitely do want to make that, distinction. And I think, it's like that with even food, right? Because a lot of us, when we quit drinking or using, food becomes a problem, or sugar, things like that. And it's like, we can really turn anything into something else.
100%. I don't have very many conversations like this with other people. Like most, I don't have like the ADD conversation, the medication issues, that how that led to my alcoholism. This is a very unique conversation that I've not had with very many people. So I've really I've enjoyed this part of the conversation tremendously.
Yeah, no, I actually love that because it's not something that I talk about a lot either. I mean, it's something that I've been open with, but it's not something that I have not heard a lot of people talk about it. So it's not something where you're like, hey, this, you just connect and like, oh, I understand. And that's really cool because I like that if there's people out there that have even been through the same thing or are going through the same thing, they're like, hey, I'm not, alone. And that's the best part of all of this, I think, is like you can listen to somebody's story and they can be like, this is so crazy. No one has ever been through this. And someone next to you will be like, no, me, been there.
It is so amazing to me when you start looking for the similarities in addiction, in recovery. You share your story. That's one of the things I love about social media and being able to share my story and be on podcasts like yours is like, I get to share my story and somebody else says, yes, not exactly that, but so close that we could be sharing the same story. And I think that's amazing. And that it builds this connection so quickly with people. And maybe they go, yeah, if they can do that, I can do it. I just needed somebody to tell me I could do a day, right? If I could just hear somebody's story and hear them say, you can do 24 hours, I was like, okay, I think I can do 24 hours. So,
right. Well, is there anything, because it's getting close to time to close out. So is there anything that you want to leave people with? Anything that you want to kind of make sure that you get out there for the listeners?
Sobriety is the best thing that ever happened to me. It changed the direction of my life. It allowed me to live a life that I never wanted, that I never dreamed of. It's something completely different than what I ever could have thought was possible. But it really does require you to take action. It really does require you to do daily work of some kind to maintain this life. It's not going to happen by itself. You have to do it.
I love that. I have definitely loved having you on. This has been such a cool convo. I want to make sure that people hear your TikTok and your Instagram again so they can definitely follow.
Yeah, it's Austin J. Karr, and it's Karr. And you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and I think YouTube too.
Yay! Thank you so much.
Thank you.